Imagine being ambushed in your own home, not by enemies, but by the people you trusted most. What if the person you trusted most blindsided you with betrayal right before your eyes? In just minutes, one man's perfect life unravels in the most shocking way possible, leading to a confrontation with unimaginable consequences. The morning started just like any other, sticking to the routine that had become more automatic than deliberate. Even after all these years since leaving the military, the discipline stayed with me. I kicked off the day with the usual early workout, grabbed a quick breakfast, and jumped straight into the tasks lined up. It was all muscle memory at this point, but there was a strange feeling lingering underneath that I couldn't quite pinpoint, like something was about to go wrong. Looking back, that uneasy feeling was a warning I should have paid more attention to. For the longest time, I convinced myself that I had everything figured out, a strong marriage, a secure job, and a comfortable home. But life has a sneaky way of hitting you when you least expect it. When I think about it now, the warning signs were always there. I just didn't want to see them, choosing to believe everything was fine. The past can't be undone, though. The only thing you can do is brace yourself for the impact and things start falling apart. That day, I was blindsided by a betrayal I never saw coming. During my time overseas, I survived 3 ambushes, and each one left me with some critical lessons. The first rule: stay vigilant and catch the red flags early. Unfortunately, I failed to see them when it came to Heather and her boss, Jason Reed. The second rule: seek cover immediately, which is exactly what I did, slipping away to the bedroom to collect myself. The third rule: form a plan, fast. I knew I had to move quickly, so I threw on some casual clothes and tucked my smartphone into my shirt pocket, setting it to record everything, just in case. Heather and I had been married for 8 years, and together we had 3 amazing kids, our 7-year-old son, Max, and our 6-year-old twin daughters, Grace and Ava. My family meant the world to me, and I made it a priority to not let work consume too much time away from them. We lived in a nice home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, and both of our parents were close by, often dropping in to spend time with the grandkids. Heather's sister lived nearby as well, adding to the picture of what seemed like the perfect life, or at least that's what I thought, right up until everything unraveled. When Heather went back to work after the kids started school, I should have picked up on the signs, but I didn't. She began dressing more provocatively, and the bond between us started to weaken. She spent more and more time at the office, and whenever I asked about it, she brushed it off, claiming it was a major career opportunity that would benefit us in the long run. Her boss, Jason Reed, was a guy I'd met a handful of times at company events, arrogant, with no sense of personal boundaries. I never liked the man. Every time I stopped by to see Heather at work, he acted like he didn't want her to leave. The red flags were right there, but I just missed them. Everything came crashing down not long after the twins had wrapped up their first year of school. My parents had the kids for the weekend, and I had been looking forward to reconnecting with Heather, just like old times. But when I walked through the door that evening, she was already dressed to kill, looking absolutely stunning, like she was headed for a night out. "Wow, you look amazing. If I'd known we had plans for tonight, I would have come home earlier," I said, smiling. "Just give me a sec to clean up, and I'll be ready to go." "Where are we headed?" Her expression shifted. She smirked, but it wasn't the smile I was used to, it was colder, unfamiliar. "We're not going anywhere," she said. "I am, but you're not." I stopped in my tracks. "What? What are you talking about?" I asked, confusion spreading across my face. "I'm going out with Jason Reed, my boss. This is just the start. From now on, things are going to change. Jason's picking me up, and I'm staying with him at his loft downtown tonight. I'll be back on Sunday," she said, her voice chillingly calm. "What the hell are you talking about?" I yelled, the shock quickly turning into anger. "Calm down, Mike, this is just how things are going to be from now on. I'll leave tonight, but I'll be back. We're staying married, and I'm still going to live here. I love you, but I need something more. If you try to make this difficult for me, it won't end well for you. The kids don't need their dad locked up. So let's sit down. Jason will be here in half an hour, and I'd rather explain everything before he arrives. Trust me, you won't like it if he's the one who has to break it down for you, she said, sitting down like she had all the time in the world, calm and in control. If that guy sets foot in this house, he's not leaving it in one piece, I growled through clenched teeth. You really don't want to do that, Heather warned, her voice cold and firm. Jason's not coming alone. His driver, Nate, will be with him, and Nate doesn't mess around. He won't think twice about putting you in the hospital. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins, just like I used to feel in combat zones overseas, but this wasn't some foreign battlefield. This was my home, and I was the one being ambushed, trapped between my wife and the guy she'd been sneaking around with. I was outnumbered in my own house. I need 5 minutes, I muttered, turning toward the stairs to gather my thoughts. Once I was in the bedroom, I went over the rules I'd lived by in dangerous situations: assess the threat, find cover, and make a plan. I had already screwed up by not seeing this ambush coming, but at least I had a few moments to regroup. I changed into more comfortable clothes, switched on the recording app on my phone, and slipped it into my pocket. Then I opened the closet, reaching for the old key hidden inside an old, beat-up shoebox. Inside was my service pistol, the same 9mm Beretta that had seen me through some rough situations. Just as I loaded the gun, I heard Heather's voice echo from downstairs. Get down here, Mike, or you're going to regret it. I'll be right there. How about you grab me a beer while you're at it? I called back, my voice steady. With the last round loaded into the chamber, I tucked the pistol behind my belt and pulled my shirt over it, making sure it stayed out of sight. With my phone still recording, I headed downstairs, ready to confront Heather and figure out just how deep this betrayal ran. When I walked into the living room, Heather was sitting at the dining table, a glass of wine already in her hand. A cold beer sat waiting for me on the table. Took you long enough, she said, smirking. We need to have a talk before Jason gets here. Looks like you've got plenty to say, I replied, keeping my voice calm and steady. She took a long breath before continuing. I want you to understand that I still love you, Mike. I always have. But things are different now. I want to stay with you, grow old together, but I also need something more. Spare me the sugarcoating, Heather. Let's keep it real. I'll call you Heather, and you can call me Mike. How about we cut through the nonsense? I interrupted. She shot me a sharp look but pressed on. Jason and I have been seeing each other for about 7 months. It started out as harmless flirting, but it's gone a lot further now. I was flattered by his attention, Heather admitted, her voice calm, and, well, one thing led to another, and here we are. Clearly, you didn't stop to think about how this would blow up, I said, trying to hold back my frustration. I'm sorry, Mike, but it doesn't change the fact that I still love you. You're the one I want to grow old with, she said, as if that somehow made things better. Good luck making that work, I muttered under my breath. Why tell me all this now, after sneaking around for months? She sighed. We're tired of hiding. Jason and I want to be open about our relationship, to travel, be together, no more sneaking around. The only way that can happen is if you accept it. Good luck with that, I repeated, this time loud enough for her to hear clearly. No, Mike, we're staying married. You just need to accept that I'll be spending time with Jason. I'll stay at his place, travel with him, go to events. This could even help us financially. Think about it, vacations, saving for the kids' college, fixing up the lake house, she explained like she was pitching some sort of business proposition. If you think I'm okay with anything paid for by that guy's money, you've got it all wrong, I fired back. Heather's face tightened. I'm not some floozy, Mike. I'm a key player at the firm, and I'm proud to be Jason's partner. This won't last forever, maybe a few years, and then things will settle back to normal. And what's Jason's angle in all of this? I asked, my anger rising, but I was doing my best to keep my cool. Jason wants to be friends with you too, she said, like that would somehow make everything better. He thinks we can all get what we need as long as no one makes a fuss. He knows I love you and want you in my life. He could even be like an uncle to the kids. That made my blood boil. He's never going near my kids. Ever. Do you hear me? Heather paused before adding, he's married, you know. His wife comes from a very wealthy and influential family, but she can't have children. Sounds like he should be focusing on his own issues, I replied sharply. Maybe he should adopt and stay the hell out of other people's lives. Jason wants kids of his own, an heir to take over the firm one day. He prefers a son, but he'd be fine with a daughter too, Heather said, avoiding my gaze. So why doesn't he just hire a surrogate and have all the kids he wants? I asked, trying to wrap my head around this insanity. He's considered it, she admitted, but he doesn't think he'd make a good father on his own. He wants his child raised in a loving family environment. The anger inside me was bubbling over, and I struggled to keep it contained. So, what, he wants to knock you up and have me raise his kid? It wouldn't be like that, Heather insisted. It would be our child too. I'd love them just like you would because you love me. The baby would have Jason's last name, and he'd pay us generously to raise the kid, covering everything from diapers to college. I stared at her in disbelief. Are you pregnant now? No, she replied, but Jason wants me to stop using birth control soon. I told him I needed you to be on board with this first. This just keeps getting better, I muttered, shaking my head. Stop saying that. Heather snapped, clearly losing her patience. I know it's a lot to take in, but eventually, we're hoping you'll come around. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Heather rushed to the door, and sure enough, Jason Reed strolled in, casually throwing his arm around her and planting a kiss on her cheek. This just keeps getting better, I muttered again, feeling the weight of the whole situation crashing down on me. How'd he take it? Jason asked in his smooth, arrogant voice. Not well, Heather said, glancing back at me. I think you need to explain the consequences, Jason. Jason, a tall, broad-shouldered man with graying hair and an air of superiority, stepped forward and looked me straight in the eye. Mr. Walker, we need to have a conversation. Conversation? I should toss you out of here, I said, clenching my fists. Jason smirked, completely unfazed. You can try, but my driver will have you in handcuffs before you get the chance. And trust me, you don't want to spend the night in jail. Let's sit down and talk like adults, shall we? I glanced over at the big guy standing by the door, his eyes locked on me. Sighing, I gave in and sat down, realizing I was outnumbered and outgunned. Good. Now, here's the situation, Jason began, his voice all business. Your wife agreed to be my personal assistant, which comes with certain added responsibilities. We've been involved for 6 months, and frankly, we're done hiding it. From now on, you'll need to accept this new arrangement. I'll take care of Heather most of the time, at work, in hotels, but occasionally, she'll stay here with me while you're away. You really think I'm just going to stand by and let this happen? I'll file for divorce before I put up with this nonsense, I snapped back, my anger boiling over. Jason remained completely calm, almost as if he was bored by the whole situation. I wouldn't rush into that if I were you. I'm one of the most powerful lawyers in this state, and my firm has connections that run deep. If you try to divorce Heather, I'll make sure you lose everything, your home, your savings, and even custody of your kids. You'll be paying child support and alimony while I live comfortably with her. And don't be surprised if you lose your job too. Your friends and family. They'll turn their backs on you once I'm through. I sat there, stunned, the full weight of their plan finally sinking in. Jason had all the power, and he knew it. He was making it clear that any attempt to fight back would end in disaster, not just legally, but in every way imaginable. Think it through, Mike. Just accept the situation. Life will be a whole lot easier. Heather's an incredible assistant, and I'm sure we can all get along just fine, Jason added, a smug smile creeping across his face. I turned to Heather, searching her eyes for some hint of remorse. Would you really do this to me? I asked quietly. I don't want to, Mike, she said softly, but I won't have to if you cooperate. In time, this will feel normal. You won't even think about it anymore. Still in shock, I watched as they started heading toward the door. Just before they left, I found my voice again. Before you two go, I've got a few things I need to say, I said, my voice calm but firm. Jason rolled his eyes, clearly irritated. Make it quick. I'll have a couple drinks to mourn whatever's left of my marriage, then I'll be making a call, to your wife, Jason. After that, I'll give Heather's sister, Megan, a ring. I'm sure she'll be more than happy to let your in-laws know what's really going on. Jason's expression shifted instantly, clearly caught off guard. What did you just say? He demanded, his voice suddenly tight. I ignored him. I'm not finished, I said steadily. Tomorrow morning, I'll be changing all the locks. Then, I'm taking Karen, the woman from down the street, out for dinner and dancing. She's been flirting with me for months, and up until now, I wouldn't have entertained the idea. But things have changed. Heather's face twisted in pain. Mike, you can't do that, she protested. I kept going, paying no mind to her plea. When you get back on Sunday, you'll find all of your stuff on the lawn. I'd suggest picking it up before the sprinklers come on Monday morning. Jason's face turned beet red, his fists clenched tightly as he realized his threats weren't getting the reaction he expected. Heather looked completely crushed. But I wasn't done. One more thing, I added. First thing Monday, I'll be meeting with a divorce lawyer. I'll file on grounds of infidelity, and you, Jason, will be named as a co-defendant. I'll also be hitting you with a lawsuit for alienation of affection and for violating your firm's ethical standards. Even if it doesn't hold up, the bad press alone will destroy your reputation. Jason's fury exploded, and he slammed his overnight bag against the wall, storming up to me and jabbing his finger hard into my chest. I fought back the urge to deck him right then and there. Listen, you idiot, he spat. You have no idea who you're messing with. I'm Jason Reed, head of the largest law firm in this state. I can crush you in court before the day is done. By the time I'm back at my suite tonight, you'll be in jail on some trumped-up charges. You really think you can go toe-to-toe with me? You don't stand a chance. I've got the cops, the DA, and the judges in my pocket. One wrong move, and your life will be over. He kept going, his rant only fueling my anger as I stood there, fists clenched at my sides. If you take Karen out tomorrow, the cops will pull you over. They'll plant drugs in your car, and you'll be tangled up in years of legal battles. No attorney will touch your case, not against me. And while you're left with nothing, I'll still be enjoying your wife. Do you get it, Mike? Sure, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. I believe every single word. Jason glared at me, his face flushed with anger. Show some respect. Call me Mr. Reed or Sir. One more smart remark, and Nate here will teach you some manners. He lunged at me, swinging for a punch, but I was faster, shoving him back onto the couch before he could connect. Heather rushed to his side as he yelled, "You'll pay for this." Nate, get in here. The front door creaked open, and Nate, Jason's towering, intimidating driver, stepped inside. "Yes, Mr. Reed?" he asked, his deep voice echoing through the room. "Handle him," Jason barked, and Nate started toward me. Heather tried to step in, but Jason waved her off without a second thought. I had been expecting trouble ever since Heather mentioned Jason would be bringing backup, so I was ready. Nate swung a heavy fist at my head, and the impact sent pain rippling through my skull. As I tasted the metallic tang of blood, a strange thought crossed my mind: how hard it would be to get bloodstains out of the carpet. Nate hesitated, unsure of whether he should continue, and glanced back at Jason for direction. "Hit him again, Nate," Jason ordered. Knowing I couldn't take much more of this, I egged him on, gritting my teeth. "You punch like a kid." Nate's face contorted with rage, and he prepared to swing again, but before he could react, I dodged the blow and found an opening. Things escalated quickly, and Nate's eyes widened as he realized this wasn't just a brawl anymore, it had turned into something much more serious. He fumbled, reaching inside his jacket for something. Moving fast, I wrestled the weapon out of his hand and tucked it into my pocket. Standing over him, catching my breath, I asked, "How much respect do you think I have for you right now?" Nate groaned, shaking his head. "Exactly. None," I said coldly, "which means nothing stopping me from ending this right now, is there?" Nate let out a pained grunt as he slumped to the floor, defeated. "If I don't get you to a hospital soon, you might not make it," I warned him. Just then, Heather's voice rang out with a panicked shout. I spun around, just in time to see Jason charging at me, wielding a fireplace poker. I raised my arm to block the blow, but the force sent a jolt of pain shooting through my body. The poker clattered to the ground, and I scrambled to grab it before he could. My hand gripped the handle just as Jason reached out for it. "Where's your phone?" I demanded, breathing heavily. Jason hesitated, then gestured toward his coat pocket. I pulled it out and handed it to him. "Unlock it," I ordered. With trembling hands, Jason did as I asked. "Now, call your wife." "FaceTime." Jason's eyes went wide with disbelief. "What? You heard me. Call your wife." Reluctantly, he tapped the screen, and a moment later, his wife's face appeared, looking confused. "Jason? Why are you calling me so late?" "Who is this?" she asked, her eyes narrowing as she noticed me in the frame. "Mrs. Reed, my name is Mike Walker." "You don't know me, but your husband knows my wife, Heather." "They've been having an affair for months," I said, my voice eerily calm given the situation. I tilted the phone so she could see Jason, who was lying on the floor, pale and visibly shaken. "Oh my God," she screamed. "Don't hurt him." "I'm not going to hurt him," I replied calmly, "but I figured you deserved to know the truth. Your husband has been lying to you. He's not in Miami on business this weekend. He's here with my wife. They had a romantic getaway planned." I swung the phone to show Heather, sitting on the couch, pale and trembling. "This is what's really going on, Mrs. Reed." There was a long, tense pause on the other end of the call before she whispered, I have to go. The police will be there soon." "Pleasure chatting," I said casually, tossing Jason's phone aside. I crouched down so we were eye to eye. "Now your wife knows all about your little secret. What was your grand plan? If I spilled the beans, send Nate and his thugs after me?" Jason stayed quiet, too preoccupied with the pain radiating from his leg, blood seeping through his pants. I glanced at him with pure disdain. "Let me make this crystal clear," I said in a low, dangerous tone. "If you send anyone after me, I'll take them down. And after that, I'll come for you. Got it?" Jason nodded weakly, his face pale and drenched with sweat. I straightened up, catching a whiff of something foul. "Did you just crap yourself?" I asked, a smirk tugging at the corner of my mouth. Heather's face was a mask of horror, realizing just how far things had spiraled out of control. "Heather, bring me my briefcase," I said calmly, still gripping the fireplace poker. Shaking, Heather hurried to grab the briefcase and handed it over. I opened it, pulling out my laptop, holding it up for Jason to see, his eyes wide with panic. "This the laptop you plan to use for your so-called evidence?" I asked, my voice steady despite the chaos in the room. Jason didn't respond, his lips pressed into a tight line. I turned the laptop over, held it near his head, and fired 2 shots into it. The gunshots echoed, the sharp smell of gunpowder filling the air. Leaning in close, I whispered in his ear, "Good luck loading anything now, you piece of garbage." Satisfied, I stood up, my head spinning. I walked into the kitchen and splashed cold water on my face, the reality sinking in, I probably had a concussion. When I made my way back to the living room, the scene hadn't changed, everyone was still frozen in place. "Stay right where you are until the cops arrive." "Won't be long now," I said with a smirk, stepping out onto the porch. Outside, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered, whispering among themselves. One of them called out, "Mike, were those gunshots?" "Yeah," I replied calmly. "Anybody call 911? A few hands went up, and I spotted Colonel Sam Hendricks, my old friend and retired Marine buddy, standing among them. "You all right, Captain?" he asked, concern clear in his voice. "You should see the other guy," I said with a grim smile, hearing sirens in the distance. "Colonel," I called out, "I could use your help." "Whatever you need, Captain," he said, stepping up onto the porch. "Help me get rid of the weapons." "I don't want to be holding anything when the cops show up," I explained, handing him the gun I'd taken from Nate. The colonel moved quickly, disarming the weapons and setting them aside on the porch table. Meanwhile, Kate, a neighbor who had seen me take a beating, approached with concern written all over her face. "Mike, you don't look so good. You should sit down." "I'm feeling lightheaded," I admitted, struggling to stay upright. "Guess I got hit harder than I realized." Kate helped me into a chair just as 2 police cruisers screeched to a halt in front of the house, lights flashing, sirens wailing. Officers spilled out, guns drawn, scanning the area for any remaining threats. The colonel quickly assured them that everything was under control and pointed out the weapons he'd secured on the table. One of the officers turned to me and said, "Sir, you need medical attention." Before I could respond, 2 ambulances pulled up, and paramedics rushed inside to tend to Nate, who was still unconscious on the floor. My head pounded, and Kate urged me to lie down. A medic checked my arm and face, muttering something about a possible broken arm. Everything started to blur, the chaos swirling around me, Nate being lifted onto a stretcher, Jason limping toward another ambulance, and then I saw Heather, escorted by a female officer, walking toward a squad car. She stopped when she saw me sitting on the porch, tears streaming down her face. "Mike, I'm so sorry. I never wanted things to end up like this. I didn't mean for you to get hurt," she cried, reaching out to me. I recoiled, pushing her away. "Go to hell, Heather," I said coldly. Her handler quickly stepped in, guiding her toward the squad car. I wasn't sure if I passed out from exhaustion or if the medic gave me something, but everything faded into black. I woke up 3 days later. When I finally regained consciousness, my vision was hazy, but I could make out a figure in white standing near my bed. For a split second, I thought I was seeing an angel, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was just a nurse, probably in her 60s. "Mr. Walker, can you hear me?" she asked, her voice filled with relief. "I'm so glad you're awake. Am I in a hospital?" I croaked, my throat dry and raspy. "Yes, you're at Mercy General. You've been unconscious for 3 days, she explained gently. 3 days? I echoed, trying to sit up but immediately regretting it as pain shot through my body. "Easy now, take it slow. I'll get the doctor," she reassured me. "By the way, my name's Rose." As Rose left the room, I took a moment to assess the damage. My right arm was in a cast, my face was bandaged, and my left eye and nose felt like they had been run over by a truck. Machines surrounded me, there was a blood pressure cuff on my arm, a saline drip hooked into the other, and much to my discomfort, I realized I was connected to a catheter. A few minutes later, Rose returned with a doctor, who introduced himself as Dr. York. "You've been through quite the ordeal, Mr. Walker," he said, flipping through my chart. "You've got a fractured forearm, a broken nose, and a nasty black eye. We kept you sedated because you also suffered a minor concussion." I nodded slowly, still piecing everything together. "It's late, so I'll give you something to help you sleep," Dr. York continued. "We'll reassess your condition in the morning." When I woke up again, daylight was streaming in through the window, but something wasn't right. My left wrist was cuffed to the bed rail. "What the hell?" I muttered, tugging at the cold metal restraint. "Take it easy, Mr. Walker," came a voice from across the room. A middle-aged man in a suit walked over, introducing himself as Detective Sergeant Adams. "Run. In this state?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Why would I even try?" "You're under arrest," Adams replied, his tone calm but firm. "For what?" I asked, my mind spinning. "Assault with intent to kill, use of a deadly weapon, and a few other charges, including unlawful discharge of a firearm. Kevin Reed filed these charges on behalf of himself, Nate Angelo, and your wife, Heather," he explained. I closed my eyes, feeling the frustration boil over. I should have seen this coming. Detective Adams read me my rights before leaving the room. Rose returned quietly to check my vitals, avoiding eye contact. "I'm sorry," she whispered when I asked her about the handcuffs. I tried to break the tension with a weak smile. "How about, when this is all over, I take you out to dinner?" Rose chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Let's focus on getting you healed first." Later, Dr. York reassured me that my injuries would eventually heal with time. He mentioned that I'd be moved to another room soon, where a different doctor would take over my care. A bit later, Detective Adams came back with some orderlies, and they wheeled me up to the third floor, where a police officer was stationed outside my new room. Once I was settled, they removed the cuffs and reconnected me to the machines. Before leaving, Adams informed me that I'd be appearing in court via video in a few days to enter a plea, and a public defender would be in touch with me before the hearing. As I lay in that cold, sterile hospital room, everything felt surreal. This was my life now. How did it come to this? I couldn't stop thinking about how quickly my world had fallen apart. One minute, I was living what seemed like a perfect life, and the next, it was all in shambles. My marriage was over, my kids were being kept from me, and I had no clue what they were being told or who was even looking after them. On top of that, I started worrying about my job. I'd been gone for 5 days without a word to anyone. The hospital staff couldn't provide me with any answers. On the 5th day, a young public defender named Sam Wilton showed up to go over my case. He laid out the charges, the same ones Detective Adams had mentioned before. Sam asked how I planned to plead and suggested negotiating with the DA, hinting that if I admitted to a few of the charges, I might walk away with reduced sentences. "Not guilty," I said firmly, cutting him off. "I didn't do any of this." Sam looked a little taken aback but carried on, informing me that Heather had been staying with her sister Megan and that the kids were with them too. They'd been told I'd be away for a long time, and hearing that hit me harder than I expected. When I asked about my job, Sam said he could contact my company and let them know about the situation. As I reviewed the charges, one in particular caught my eye. Spousal abuse. "What is this?" I asked, pointing to the line in disbelief. Sam explained that Jason Reed had added the charge after Heather claimed I had slapped her. There were even photos of bruises on her face and arm. "I never laid a hand on her." I protested, but the doubtful look on Sam's face told me he wasn't entirely convinced. I didn't trust him enough to dive into the details, knowing full well that Jason's influence could have already tainted the legal process. "Sam, you need to plead not guilty for me," I insisted. Reluctantly, Sam agreed but warned me that the shooting charge would mean I'd have to post bail. He seemed unsure of my innocence, but I kept quiet about the evidence I had that could prove it was all in self-defense. I didn't want anything slipping back to Jason or the DA. Instead, I told Sam to get in touch with my uncle, Jack Carter, a retired Navy attorney. I gave strict instructions for him to keep everything confidential, only sharing the charges and my plea with Uncle Jack. Later that night, Sam confirmed that Uncle Jack was on his way and advised me to say nothing at my arraignment except for not guilty. The next day, I appeared via video for my arraignment. I pleaded not guilty to every charge. The prosecutor argued for no bail, but the judge allowed me to stay in the hospital for 2 more days before I would be transferred to county jail. A day before my transfer, Uncle Jack arrived. He officially took over the case and was granted permission to visit. The moment I saw him, the weight of everything hit me like a ton of bricks, and I felt my eyes well up as the reality of the situation finally sank in. After a quick hug, Uncle Jack got straight to business, making sure we had privacy to talk. He filled me in on the family, reassuring me that the kids were okay and still staying with Megan until the police completed their investigation. According to Uncle Jack, Megan was confused by everything that had happened. Heather had fed her a twisted version of the events, but knowing me for years, Megan found it hard to believe. She was relieved when Uncle Jack stepped in to handle things. Then Uncle Jack asked for my version of the story. Speaking in hushed tones, I laid it all out, the threats from Jason, the attack by Nate, and how Heather had likely helped twist the narrative after I was taken in. I also told him about the video evidence I had on my iPhone, hidden away in the kitchen drawer, capturing everything that had gone down that night. Jack didn't show much emotion, but I could see a flicker of relief in his eyes. If there's evidence, we've got a real shot. I'll be your guardian angel through this, Mike. You focus on getting better, and I'll handle your defense. I'll also see about arranging bail, he promised, adding that he'd check in on the kids and coordinate with Megan. 3 days later, I was transferred to county jail. At my next court appearance, Uncle Jack pulled some strings, and I was released on bail, though I was placed under house arrest. Jack had rented a townhouse in a gated community for us, where I would be staying under his supervision. I couldn't leave the area, but at least I was out of jail. Uncle Jack didn't waste any time. He hired a private investigator to dig up leads, but the biggest hurdle was retrieving my phone from the house. The evidence on it could make or break the case, but we couldn't afford to get it illegally, which would only create more problems. Jack assured me he'd figure it out, though it might take a little time. In the meantime, he set us up with new phones so we could communicate securely. One evening, I gave my neighbor, Colonel Sam Hendricks, a call. He'd mentioned noticing some odd activity around my house. After telling Jack about it, he suggested we invite Sam over for beers and steaks to get more details. During dinner, Sam shared a troubling story. About a week after the incident, he saw 2 men dressed in black trying to pick the lock on my garage door. Always on alert, the colonel grabbed his dog and a bat and confronted them. Startled, the men backed off but threatened him before speeding off in a black SUV with a smudged license plate. Sam called the cops, but by the time they showed up, the men were long gone. Thanks to the colonel's quick thinking, my car had been moved to a safe location. This confirmed Kevin's earlier threat to plant drugs in my vehicle, and I felt a wave of relief knowing it was out of harm's way. Sam also had more intel. 2 days after Heather returned to the house, he saw the same black SUV parked out front. 2 men were talking to her near the open garage, pointing to where my car usually was. After a brief conversation, they went inside and stayed for about 45 minutes before leaving. This time, Sam managed to jot down the license plate number. Uncle Jack ran the plate through his contacts and found out it was registered to a company called Unique Services, a private investigation firm. The firm employed 2 men, Jose Gonzalez and Miguel Ortega, both ex-cops with shady pasts. Jose had resigned after being involved in a theft scandal, while Miguel had been fired for fabricating evidence. Unsurprisingly, Kevin Reed's law firm was one of their clients. Retrieving my phone became more urgent than ever. Uncle Jack decided it was time to act. He called Heather, proposing a meeting to discuss possibly dropping the charges and working things out. Heather, familiar with Jack from family gatherings, was cautious but agreed to meet the next day, on the condition that one of her lawyer's assistants could be present. Jack agreed. At exactly 6 p.m. the following evening, Uncle Jack arrived at the house. Heather greeted him at the door with a quick hug, dressed simply in a skirt and blouse, her hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. Inside, a young man named Gordon Merritt, an associate from Kevin Reed's law firm, was already waiting. Jack was introduced, and the three of them settled into the family room. Heather offered to make coffee, but Merritt waved her off, suggesting they get straight to business. He pulled out a tape recorder, and Uncle Jack, not missing a beat, did the same, exchanging a polite smile with Merritt. Uncle Jack started off, expressing his regret over how things had spiraled out of control. He mentioned how he had always admired Heather and me as a couple. Heather nodded sadly, saying she never intended for things to fall apart like this. Uncle Jack continued, subtly hinting that he believed the charges against me were justified. He brought up the fact that I had claimed Heather and Jason were having an affair, and that seeing Jason at the house had pushed me over the edge. Merritt quickly jumped in, stating that the evidence against me seemed pretty solid. Uncle Jack leaned forward, thoughtfully suggesting that maybe I hadn't been in my right mind at the time, overwhelmed by the belief that Jason was stealing my wife. Merritt seemed to consider the idea, admitting they might be willing to reduce some charges, but only if I pled guilty to a few of them. Do all the charges need to stick, or is there room to reduce or drop some? Uncle Jack asked, sounding cooperative. Merritt exchanged a glance with Heather before replying. I'll have to run it by Jason. He's got some pull with the DA, and he might prefer to settle this quietly to avoid any damage to his reputation. Before the conversation wrapped up, Uncle Jack softened his tone and gently reminded Heather that I missed the kids terribly. He added a sharp warning, though, if the truth came out, she could be facing serious charges for perjury and obstruction. He gave Merritt a similar warning, hinting that if he knowingly backed a false narrative, he could also be held accountable. With that, Uncle Jack stood and politely asked if he could grab a glass of water. Heather, oblivious to his true motive, pointed him toward the kitchen. Once there, Jack made sure he was out of sight from the family room. He opened the fridge loudly, then quietly searched through the drawer near the sink. After a quick search, he found my iPhone tucked beneath a pile of dish towels. He slipped it into his pocket, poured himself a glass of water, and casually returned to the family room about 2 minutes later. Before I head out, Heather, is there anything else you'd like to add? Uncle Jack asked, standing by the door. Heather looked nervously at Merritt, who responded for her. We've said all we need to for now, Mr. Carter. If there are any changes to the charges, you'll need to cooperate fully if you want this case to go away. Uncle Jack nodded, thanked them for their time, and left. He didn't bring the iPhone straight back to the townhouse. Instead, he took it directly to a digital forensics firm called Digital Analysis Solutions, DAS. He knew the recordings on that phone could make or break the case, and DAS promised to handle everything with care. They assured him they'd have results for us in just a few days. When Uncle Jack and I visited DAS, they had already transferred all the phone's data to their secure servers. They found the critical video of the incident and made multiple copies to ensure nothing could be lost or tampered with. We watched the footage together. It clearly showed Max pulling a gun on me. Although parts of the video were blurry, it captured the crucial moments that would help my defense. DAS also uncovered 97 unopened emails and 64 text messages, all sent after the incident. Most of the messages were from friends and family, but one stood out. It contained 27 photos that would have automatically downloaded to my phone if I had opened it. It seemed pretty clear Jason had tried to plant evidence on my phone after I destroyed my laptop. Uncle Jack thanked the team at DAS and left the phone with them for safekeeping. We took a few copies of the video for ourselves. As we talked through the next steps, Uncle Jack mulled over whether to present the evidence to the DA right away. Doing so might lead to the charges being dropped and could even implicate Jason, Nate, and Heather. But if Jason's influence was as strong as we suspected, the DA might just try to bury the case quietly. The other option was to wait until the hearing. We could let the prosecution present their case, and then we'd hit them with our evidence, forcing their hand to prosecute Jason, Nate, and Heather for perjury, obstruction, and more. That could mean serious jail time for them and give me a better shot at getting custody of the kids. When Uncle Jack asked how I wanted to play it, I didn't hesitate. "Let's burn them all," I said firmly. A grin spread across Uncle Jack's face. "I was hoping you'd say that, Mike. I want my Perry Mason moment in court too." With 3 weeks until the hearing, Uncle Jack focused on getting everything in order. He figured that dropping the video too early might lead to it being suppressed, so we kept it under wraps, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash it. A week before the hearing, Uncle Jack had to return to San Francisco for some court obligations and to spend time with his own family. While he was away, I got a call from the gate guard letting me know that Heather was at the gate, asking to see me. My heart started racing. I immediately called Uncle Jack to ask what I should do. "If she wants to talk, hear her out. But remember, she's dangerous. Don't touch her, don't lose your cool, and be polite," Uncle Jack warned. "Don't worry, Uncle Jack," I replied. "She's poison to me now." "You know what you have to do, right?" he asked firmly. "Yeah, Uncle Jack, I do." After hanging up, I told the gate to let her through. I had a few minutes before she arrived, so I quickly straightened up the townhouse. I cleared the legal papers from the dining table, tossing them on the bed, grabbed the empty beer cans, tidied up the kitchen, and loaded the dishwasher. I threw on a pair of Dockers and a knit sports shirt, combed my hair, and decided to leave my 3-day stubble. It gave me a more serious look. When Heather knocked, I opened the door. She looked like she had put a lot of effort into her appearance, wearing a red pleated skirt and a pink cashmere sweater, her hair styled in a loose updo, and her makeup was just enough to enhance her natural beauty. "Come on in, Heather," I said, stepping aside. "You look great." "Thanks, Mike." "You look good too," she replied, her eyes scanning over me. "You've slimmed down." "I've had time to hit the gym and eat better," I said, motioning toward the couch. I poured her a glass of white wine and sat down next to her with a glass of red for myself. After a few sips, I broke the silence. "So, why'd you come to see me, Heather?" "Mike, despite everything, I still love you." "I never wanted things to get this out of hand," she began, her voice softer than I'd heard in a long time. "I thought you'd be okay with my relationship with Jason. We could have had a lot of money, a good life. Over time, things could have settled back to normal." "Sorry I ruined your little dream," I said with a hint of sarcasm. "It wasn't my plan, it was Jason's," she admitted. "He thought he could scare you into submission like he does with everyone else. Neither of us expected you to stand up and fight back." "Well, I guess he didn't know me as well as he thought," I replied, keeping my eyes locked on hers. Then, out of nowhere, Heather asked, "Where's your car?" I smirked. "I moved it after Jason threatened to plant drugs in it. By the way, who were those guys snooping around the house after you got back? They seemed awfully interested in the garage and the fact that my car was gone." Heather hesitated for a moment, then admitted, they were going to plant evidence. "I didn't want them to, but Jason insisted." "You didn't seem to mind stacking evidence against me," I replied, my voice sharp. "If you really love me, tell the truth, and the charges will disappear." "I can't, Mike," she said quietly, barely meeting my eyes. "I'm in too deep. Jason controls everything." "Guess I'm out of luck then," I muttered under my breath. I shifted the conversation. "And what about the accusation of abuse? I've seen the pictures of your bruises, but you know I never laid a hand on you." Heather looked down at her glass of wine. That was Jason's idea. He came up with the story, that you lost it, accused us of having an affair, and attacked me. Max tried to help, and you shot him. To make it look real, Jason hit me to give me the bruises. We've been rehearsing the story ever since. I'm sorry, Mike. I never wanted it to go this far. I just want things to go back to how they used to be, she added, her voice trembling slightly. That's not happening, I said bluntly. Then Heather made her pitch. Jason knows about your PTSD. He wants you to plead guilty, claiming it triggered everything that happened. He'll use his connections to get you into a veterans hospital for treatment. You could be out in less than a year, and we could start fresh with the kids. So that was her real reason for coming. She wanted me to go along with Jason's plan, dangling the promise of a light sentence and a stay at a veterans mental facility. I didn't believe a word of it, but I decided to play along. That sounds reasonable, Heather, I said slowly. But I'll need time to think it over. Plus, I should run it by Uncle Jack. He might agree. I'm not sure he has much to work with, she said, her eyes lighting up a bit. Given your testimony, Jason's, and Max's. Please, Mike, do this for yourself, for me, and for the kids. In a few years, this will all be behind us, just a bump in the road. I let out a bitter laugh. A bump? You've been with another man for months, expected me to go along with it while you slept with your boss, threatened to take my kids if I didn't fall in line, and made up lies that could land me in prison for years. That's more than just a bump in the road. That's why I want you to take Jason's offer. It's the easiest way out for all of us, she said, her voice breaking as tears welled up in her eyes. Like I said, I'll think about it, I replied, my voice colder now. Just when I thought we were done, Heather surprised me by placing her hand on mine. Maybe we could rest together for a little while, she whispered. I've missed having you in my bed. Can we just lie down together tonight and forget about everything for a few hours? That's not going to happen, Heather, I said firmly, pulling my hand away. She understood the message. Please consider Jason's offer, she said as I walked her to the door. Before leaving, she gave me a hug. It felt sincere, but I didn't return it. The purpose of the hearing was simple, determine whether I would be held for further investigation. The prosecution, feeling confident, brought Jason, Max, and Heather to the stand. Their stories were well rehearsed, each one sticking closely to the same fabricated narrative. Uncle Jack asked each of them only one question. Do you swear your testimony is truthful? All three answered without hesitation, yes. Uncle Jack had wanted to go after Jose and Miguel, the two men who had tried to break into my garage, but their involvement wasn't directly relevant to the charges I was facing. Since they hadn't succeeded in planting any evidence, it couldn't be used as part of my defense. Once the prosecution rested, it was Uncle Jack's turn. With the court's permission, he stood and addressed the judge. The defense would like to introduce a videotape of the events as evidence, he said calmly, holding up the crucial piece of our case. This tape is exculpatory, Your Honor, Uncle Jack stated firmly. Immediately, the assistant prosecutor objected. This is new evidence that hasn't been presented for review. There's a reason for that, Uncle Jack explained. The defense has concerns about bias from both the district attorney and the court, and we feared our evidence would be unfairly blocked. Do you have proof that the district attorney is compromised, Mr. Carter? The judge asked, raising an eyebrow. The proof is on the video, Your Honor, Uncle Jack replied confidently. Visibly annoyed, the judge began to rise. Then you and the prosecution will join me in chambers, where I'll review the tape and determine its admissibility. Uncle Jack didn't back down. No, Your Honor, we won't do that. Why not? The judge demanded, clearly irritated by Uncle Jack's defiance. Because, Your Honor, Uncle Jack continued, the defense does not trust the court to remain impartial, and we refuse to risk having our evidence suppressed. The judge's irritation was now obvious. Are you accusing this court of corruption, Mr. Carter? Possibly, Your Honor, Uncle Jack said without missing a beat. The judge's expression hardened. Can you substantiate that claim, or is your proof also on this tape? He pressed further. It is on the tape, Your Honor, Uncle Jack confirmed, but I believe I can prove my point if you answer a few simple questions. The judge, skeptical but intrigued, leaned forward. Let me get this straight, Mr. Carter. You think you can demonstrate bias against your client by asking me a few questions? Is that your argument? Yes, Your Honor, Uncle Jack affirmed, his voice steady. The judge, now more curious than annoyed, replied, Very well, Mr. Carter. Ask your questions. But understand this, if you fail, we will review the tape in chambers, and I will decide whether it's admissible. I accept, Your Honor, Uncle Jack replied confidently. But let me make one thing clear, if this tape is ruled inadmissible, and my client is convicted on the testimony of the prosecution's witnesses, I will release the tape to the public. It will go to the media, online, everywhere. And the tape contains evidence that could raise serious questions about your integrity, should you choose not to allow it. The judge's face darkened. It sounds like you're threatening me, Mr. Carter. Before the judge could escalate further, Uncle Jack calmly asked, Your Honor, your eldest son is currently in college, correct? He's attending the Air Force Academy, is that right? Yes, the judge replied cautiously. A freshman? Uncle Jack pressed. Getting into the Air Force Academy is no easy feat, is it? The judge nodded, slightly easing his posture. It's very competitive. Uncle Jack continued. First, your son had to apply through your district's congressman or senator. Then he had to sit for the civil service exam. Based on his performance, he was selected, along with a small group of other candidates. Afterward, he underwent a medical exam, physical fitness test, and aptitude test for pilot and navigator training at a nearby Air Force base. He also took the necessary college entrance exams. Is that all correct, Your Honor? Yes, the judge answered, pride creeping into his voice. He got an A- average in high school and was on the swim team all 4 years. You're rightly proud of him, Your Honor, Uncle Jack acknowledged, then added, but who wrote the third letter of recommendation for his application? The judge paused, then replied, Mr. Stanley Cross wrote that letter for my son's admission to the Air Force Academy. Uncle Jack didn't miss a beat. Mr. Cross must know your son very well, unless, of course, that letter was full of fabricated praise. The judge quickly clarified, my son worked for Mr. Cross during his sophomore and junior years of high school. He's considering becoming a lawyer. So, Mr. Cross is a close family friend? Uncle Jack pressed further. The judge chose his words carefully. He's more of an acquaintance than a family friend. We're professional associates in a few legal organizations. Uncle Jack nodded and drove his point home. Then, Your Honor, you can understand why the defense might question your impartiality in this case. The judge shifted slightly in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. You're challenging my integrity, counselor. Let me assure you, any relationship I have with Mr. Cross will not sway my decisions. However, you've raised an issue of perception. The courtroom grew still as the judge considered the situation. After a long pause, he looked up and said, Play the video, Mr. Carter. Uncle Jack signaled to the bailiff to dim the lights and lower the projection screens beside the judge's bench. He turned to me and whispered, It's showtime, Mike. Then, with a press of the enter key, the video began. The footage played out before the judge, the prosecution, and a courtroom full of spectators. Jason's face filled the screen as his voice rang out, cold and arrogant. I know all the top people in law enforcement. Half of the DA's office is on my speed dial. Some of them owe me favors, Jason boasted on the tape. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. At the prosecution's table, the assistant DA went pale, her hands trembling. After a few moments, she lowered her head onto the table and began sobbing uncontrollably. The entire courtroom watched in silence as she hastily gathered her belongings and fled the room in tears. Uncle Jack remained calm, his eyes never leaving the screen. As the video continued, Jason, Max, and Heather quietly attempted to slip out of the courtroom. But they didn't go unnoticed. The judge, his face dark with anger, ordered them to stay seated. The remaining assistant prosecutors stared at the screen, their expressions tense and strained. The lead prosecutor, looking ashen, rose to his feet, clearly about to request a recess. But before he could say a word, Uncle Jack cut in. "I've got another video." Without waiting for the judge's permission, Uncle Jack queued up the second recording, explaining it had been made 2 weeks earlier during Heather's visit to my townhouse. He hit play, and the video began. Heather's eyes widened as the gravity of the situation hit her. The video clearly showed her confessing everything, how Jason had orchestrated the plot to frame me. "Mike, how could you do this to me?" Heather screamed in panic as the full weight of her actions sank in. Across the courtroom, Jason finally realized the enormity of their mistake. "You idiot, Max. You absolute idiot." Jason snapped. "You let him record her. How could you be so reckless?" Heather had no idea that when she visited me, I'd set my phone to record the entire conversation. I'd placed it on the coffee table, hidden among some books and papers. The recording began just moments before I'd opened the door to let her in. The assistant district attorney, visibly shaken, quickly requested a recess to review the new evidence. Uncle Jack calmly handed over copies of the videos on DVDs. The judge adjourned the hearing until the next morning. When court resumed the following day, the 3 key prosecution witnesses, Jason, Max, and Heather, were notably absent. Instead of the acting district attorney, the county's actual district attorney now sat at the prosecution table. The judge granted him permission to speak first. "I'll keep this brief, Your Honor," the district attorney began. "First, all charges against Mr. Walker are hereby dismissed. After reviewing the evidence, we've determined that he acted in self-defense against Mr. Reed and Mr. Angelo. It was a violent self-defense, but self-defense nonetheless. Second, my office has issued arrest warrants for Mr. Jason Reed, Mr. Nate Angelo, and Mrs. Heather Walker for conspiracy to commit perjury, bribery, perjury, assault with intent to cause grievous harm, making false statements to law enforcement, filing false complaints, and obstruction of justice. Additionally, it has come to our attention that Mr. Reed attempted to plant false evidence against Mr. Walker, with Mr. Angelo and Mrs. Walker fully aware of these actions." He continued, "We have also identified 2 individuals working for Mr. Reed who attempted to plant that evidence, and we are in the process of arresting them as well." Later that day, Jason Reed, Nate Angelo, and my wife, Heather, were arrested. Though they were all released on bail, the district attorney, furious to learn how deeply Kevin's influence had corrupted his office over the years, began systematically rooting out all the colleagues who had been involved in Mitchell's schemes. In time, all the defendants were convicted. Jason was the only one who pled not guilty, which turned out to be a major mistake, as both Nate and Heather pled guilty and testified against him. Jason was sentenced to 11 years in prison, while Nate received a 7-year sentence. Heather was sentenced to 5 years. Jose and Miguel, the 2 men Jason had hired to tamper with evidence, were also arrested for obstruction of justice and evidence tampering. The district attorney played them against each other, and eventually, Miguel cracked under the pressure and confessed in hopes of a lighter sentence. Both ended up serving long prison terms. Jason remained in county jail until his transfer to state prison. Nate and Heather, however, were granted 2 weeks to get their affairs in order before turning themselves into the sheriff. Nate used that time to prepare his family for his absence, hoping for parole in 4 years with good behavior, as his lawyer had suggested. As for Heather, well, I didn't care what she did with her time.